At ScaleMate, we work with very early stage startups. So one of the things we typically do is test whether a startup has product market fit in the US. Now that can mean a whole lot of different things to a whole lot of different people. Product market fit is, the ultimate goal, obviously, of any startup to scale. What comes before that is really messaging market fit and uncovering a pain point. So I'll talk you through that, how we think about it, how we think about validating new markets and really testing your value proposition. Some of this information may be super obvious. That's fine. I'm hoping there's parts that maybe you haven't thought about. Maybe the entire process is structured well and you can get some value from it. So first step, and this is typically in the background before we start working with founders. They usually have some level of product vision. They'll have some market hypothesis. Maybe they have customers in India, maybe they have customers in Singapore, wherever it is. They're solving problems for someone, or they believe they can solve problems for someone in the US, right? So they'll have a company vision, a product vision, and it's then my job to synthesize that into a testable experiment to go to market and see who responds well for top of funnel messaging, and also who responds well for down funnel or on meetings, on discovery calls. What messaging works, what resonates? Are there patterns we can recognize over the course of 5, 6, 7, 10 meetings that we can then use in a go-to-market strategy? But my job is to clearly lay out what you would like to test in the US. What does good look like for you? What are some key data points that you would like to get out of this engagement? And then we can go on to the next step and start designing campaigns. So the founders come to us, they have an idea of a market, they might have some existing customers we can chat to, they've got problem statements, maybe they have sales decks, depends on the stage they're at, right? The next job for us is to first understand the product vision in detail. I think this is where most agencies, most go-to-market specialists, most lead gen companies, or whatever we want to call it, I think they make the mistake here of trying to go too fast into campaigns and not really understanding the business. That's not our position. We get very, very deep into the ICP, the problem statements, the product. There's a whole onboarding flow that we go through with clients. Ultimately, the step is to define what their ICP is, or at least their testable ICP in the US, their ideal customer profile. Now, an ideal customer profile, you can see here on the chart, is typically made up of two segments. On the left-hand side is the companies, so company firmographics, and on the right-hand side is the contacts, so the contact demographics. Fancy words for what companies are we targeting and who are we targeting in those companies, right? So in the company realm, we can look at types of industries, we can look at the size of the company. Annual revenue, I've found to be not the best parameter to use, the reason being, a lot of that data is not publicly available if they're not a public company, if they're a startup, whatever it might be. So not great. I typically use the size of the company as a proxy. Location of headquarters, all that stuff, right? Then you can get a bit fancier if you do need to, depending on the customer that you're going after, but you can use things like tech stack. You can use databases like Built With to find what tech they use if that's important, if that's a trigger. So a whole bunch on the company side. On the contact side, the real question is like, what job titles are we going after? And there's different ways to approach that. You can literally type in, the example I'll use is a cybersecurity company. Everyone wants to talk to CISOs, right? That's usually the case. So you could put in to Apollo or any other list building tool that you use, Chief Information Security Officer or CISO, great. Or you could do more of a catch-all, which is actually the way that I like to prospect, and just say security, infosec, risk, like whatever those keywords are, but less defined, and then use the seniority parameter to then say C-suite, VP, director, head, manager, whatever those seniorities are that you would like to target. What that is going to do for you is catch the job titles that have security in them, but they're not just a CISO, right? So VPs of security, VPs of IT security, whatever it is. But you want to use keywords to kind of widen the net as much as possible. And then you can become more specific over time. That's fine. I do both techniques. But that's essentially what an ICP or a target list is made up of. Now, at the very beginning, first prospecting, so I'm using this from the lens of you're a startup and you're testing the US market. I'm not overly bullish on using super tight indicators like company headcount growth as an example, unless it's very relevant to the product and the value proposition. That's fine. The reason for that is you're going to have to target those contacts eventually anyway. Let's say we put in a parameter to Apollo that says only target companies that have displayed 3% headcount growth over the last 12 months, right, and above. You've just cut out the ones that have done 2% growth over the last 12 months, right? You're probably going to go to those companies at some stage. So I feel like those really niche small indicators at the very beginning aren't as relevant. I'm not saying that is for every single startup or every single company that's going to do outbound, but typically I like to widen the net a little bit more, and those small parameters don't seem to matter as much at the beginning when all you need is data and feedback and conversations to happen. The question also becomes is how much effort is it to segment data like that? If it's a simple parameter in Apollo, then maybe it's worth it. It's not a massive time suck and resource suck. If you have to do a fancy clay table and crazy formulas and all this stuff for lead prioritization and scoring, I just don't think most of the time that effort is worth the payoff. Now, when we work with startups, our job is to really get at the fact, what is your level of conviction around this customer profile? Now, that can, again, this is very generally speaking, but some startups will come to us with a very specific problem that they're solving for a very specific customer, and there's limited ambiguity in who they can target. So if you are insurance technology and you're going after workers' compensation insurance specifically, well, now you've cut out P&C, you've cut out all the other types of insurance that are out there, health insurance, etc. So very specific. So on the company side, there's not much room for flexibility or testing because your product may not work for any other types of industries, right? However, let's say on the job title front, you're unsure of whether you should go after C-suite, VPs, directors, heads, managers, like users of the product, right? That's where there's testing. So we want to include all the different seniorities for this test to see who responds better, who actually gets on the phone with us, who gets on a call. And then when they're on the call, what do they say? Are they close to the problem? Do they give bullshit answers where they don't really know the problem space? That's what we want to find out, and that's important data to have. So depending on the customer, they could have, technically an industry agnostic product. So we want to test a few industries, or they could have a very specific industry and they want to test more of the job title, functions, seniority side. So really depends on the customer. That's our job to design that experiment effectively. Okay, so next is to synthesize and develop your market hypothesis, your thesis, your problem statements, whatever you want to call it, right? But you have an idea from your product vision and what you're building of what problems you're solving for or what opportunity gap you're addressing, right? So we will go through an entire process to define this, but essentially we want to arrive at like 3 to 6 key problem statements that if they don't exist, if you cannot sell to them, you probably don't have a business in the United States, right? So there's a whole process behind that. We want to say your customer should experience this problem or should be looking to address this gap for whatever reason. Fantastic. Those are the statements that we want to arrive at that are vitally important to your value proposition, messaging, and scalability over time, essentially. The reason we want to be pretty maniacal about this is because that's going to dictate the questions that we ask when we're on a discovery call. So customer or the ICP struggles to do XYZ, right? That's one statement. Now, underneath that is going to be a whole bunch of questions. So I can go into an excruciating amount of detail on question design, how you should ask questions, how you should preface questions, all this stuff. Again, this really depends on the level of conviction the startup has about their market and their product. What do I mean by that? If you are a founder who has zero experience in the industry you're targeting, and it's completely new to you, you probably don't have a massive amount of conviction around what problems you're solving. You're basically looking real surface level to see if they exist and see if people care about them when we talk to them, right? So those questions are going to be initially very surface level. How do you do X? Is it a challenge to do X, right? We can't really predict what they're going to say because you're so early, right? So that's one type of engagement we would do. The second type of engagement is we've got 20 customers around the world. This bank tells us that this is a problem. We've interviewed them. We've done our, sort of post-sales, why did you buy the product, all that sort of stuff. And we're pretty confident that these three things are the reasons why someone would experience this pain point. Great. That way, we can then pepper the questions, right, beforehand. So instead of saying, how do you do X? Or is it a challenge to do X? We could say, hey, our customers tell us that X is tough because of A, B, C. Is that true? Like which one resonates more with you, right? So you can prime them for answers a little bit more depending on the level of conviction the founder has about the space, etc. If they're very experienced in the space. That's where you start storytelling. Oh, when I used to work at this bank, we used to do this, this, and this. How do you guys do it? Right? It's more conversational versus pure discovery. And that typically comes down to, again, the level of conviction you have about your market. What you have to keep in mind is when you give examples of how the person should answer this question, you are now biasing their answers. They have maybe a list of 3 things that instantly trigger in their head when you give them those potential answers. You have to be a very special, different type of person to say something that isn't in those 3 answers once you've done that, right? That's putting them on the spot to really think about the problem statement. And if they give you an answer that's outside of that 3, even if you've primed them for it, you better listen to that. So keep that in mind when you are framing conversations and giving them potential answers versus just asking a question. You are biasing them. You are potentially getting incorrect feedback from the market. So everything has to be taken into consideration there each time you get an answer to those types of questions. Let's go into more question design. Again, depending on the stage, I'm going to repeat this theme. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. You want to ask sort of opening current state questions, because half the battle, especially in enterprise sales and SaaS sales, is agreeing on the problem to begin with. Like most of the time a startup is going after a new problem or an old problem in a different way. So a little bit of education is required, a little bit of giving examples, customer stories, all this sort of typical sales stuff to agree on the problem. Now that you agree on the problem, you want to ask and understand, do they experience it, first of all? That's the first one. Yes or no, and the reasons why. Getting a reason why to a no is super important. That is like the best data you can possibly get, especially when you look at it across time and across discovery calls or interviews, right? If you get a no and a reason why across 4 different interviews, 5 different interviews, 6 different interviews, and it's the same answer, you can invalidate that pain point, most likely, right? Again, all depends. Number 1, do they experience the problem, yes or no? How big is it? How big is either the problem or the opportunity you're looking to address? If someone just tells me it costs us time and resources, I take that as a non-answer completely. They haven't thought about it, or they're just giving you a fairly lazy answer. It could indicate they're not close to the problem at all. It's not good enough. It's not a meaty enough answer for me to be like, all right, this person knows this space very well and they're probably going to be motivated to buy. Versus they say, I have a team of 6 analysts. 6 analysts spend 3 hours a week each, roughly, whatever it might be, and we spent 30 grand a year on an automation tool. I'm reading off of this, the RPA tool, right, to solve this problem. That's a way more specific, close to the problem, have thought about solving it type of answer. Great. So number 1, does the problem exist? Yes or no? How big is it? have they tried to solve it before intentionally? So not just we hired someone, maybe that's okay in some scenarios, but we hired someone to specifically solve and address this gap that we had. It has to be an intentional needle mover for that specific problem, not just a generic business problem. So if those three things are true, they seem to be pretty true, and they're answering them well, and then not only in one customer discovery call, but in 5, 6, 7, everyone's saying a similar thing, you're probably onto something. Now, the implications there are, let's use this in messaging, let's put this on the website more, let's figure out the keywords that get the best response here. How did we ask that question to get them to confirm this pain point? This is where you have to go over previous calls, see how people responded. And then the fourth thing is obviously more on the sales side, is this a problem that you're solving now? Is it something that you want to do this quarter, next year? What sort of priority is it? So that's how I think about generally high level asking questions to really uncover a pain point. So if you see small scale patterns, so like 3 customer interviews, people are saying, a similar thing, great. You can start asking questions a little bit more pointed, probably. Maybe give those examples that we spoke about. Hey, other people say this, is that true? X, Y, Z. Then if you see it across 5, 6, 7 meetings and people are saying the exact same thing, that's when I would consider, hey, you need to go put this on the website. You need to use this keyword. You need to update marketing materials, etc., etc. That threshold depends on the types of answers. It depends on a lot of things, but those are just general kind of rules of thumb for making bigger decisions around marketing and messaging. Now, if you constantly do this and you're constantly looking for different angles and every single call, you are re-listening to calls, you're analyzing multiple transcripts across different interviews and different discovery calls, then you will eventually get to something that resonates with the market. Something else to look out for as well is, what do people mention voluntarily? So you didn't ask a question, they just brought it up. And if one person brings it up, cool, and not that interesting. If 6 people bring it up, you need to listen to that. That could then actually dictate a whole different set of questions that you ask, right? So you just need to listen for those indicators. The more you do it, the better you'll become at it. This kind of brings me full circle. What is product market fit? Product market fit really, in my opinion, is not that complicated. You have a whole bunch of customers that sing your praises from the rooftop. They are happy to give referrals. They are happy to give case studies, video case studies, written case studies, and they're a free marketing engine for you. That's product market fit. I think most startups actually get stuck with messaging market fit. They're not speaking the same language of the customer. They cannot agree on the problems that they're solving for, why they're so important. They struggle with educating a customer, especially in a new space where they may not be 100% familiar or understand it. Maybe you're an AI tool going into an old industry to try to transform it. They don't fully understand the implications of AI. They have an old tech stack. There's a lot of education that goes into it. Messaging market fit is kind of the precursor to product market fit, in my opinion. So look, at a very super high level, that's how I think about testing the US market. Pretty clear steps. First one, who's your ICP? Who's your test audience? Second, what problems or opportunity gaps are you going after? Let's define those. Build out messaging and go to market, talk to people, and just keep iterating on that. I have this document available. If you do want a copy of this flowchart, comment on the post and I can send it over.